And everyone, welcome. I am excited today to have Chris Freeman. We're going to get into everything today. We're going to get into a little bit of economics, a little bit of behavioral philosophy, probably even a little bit of writing process, hopefully, since Chris is so prolific. I definitely want to dive into that. But Chris, welcome. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. The right way to reason, about anything, forget about politics for a second, but just in general is you say, all right, I'm going to look at the arguments, I'm going to look at the evidence, and on the basis of that, I will form a conclusion. So you could imagine that you're sitting on a jury and you say, all right, I'm going to hear both sides. I'm going to, weigh everything that was said without bias and then come to a conclusion about whether this person is guilty or innocent. This is not really how we reason about politics. We tend to do it backwards, where we start with the conclusion and then try to pick and choose arguments and evidence that tells us that this conclusion is correct. So it's sort of the opposite of the way that we want to reason.
Why did I write this book? A life full of meaning, achievement, and hope often seems unreachable for Western men. But now in these pages, an offer is lurking, waiting, expecting, daring you to seize it. This is an offer to give up being a victim to forever arise a victor. Visit rickwalker.com.
And you say, okay, well, how do we choose which conclusion we think is correct? And it's like, of course, it's the one that our party endorses, our side endorses. So if your party supports tariffs or opposes tariffs or has an opinion about the death penalty, abortion, and so on, you think, okay, this is sort of what my team stands for. And being a good member of my team, be it Team Republican, Team Democrat, what have you, being a good team member means sort of sincerely believing that what my team does is correct. And now this is not a great way to reason, because instead of letting the arguments and the evidence determine your conclusion, you let your conclusion determine what arguments and evidence you believe. So if you think, tariffs are good, you might selectively believe evidence that tells you that tariffs are good, and then just sort of hand wave away any sort of counter evidence that would tell you that you're wrong. Or maybe you have a curated social media feed where you're not even looking at counter evidence to your own party. You're only looking at stuff that tells you my party is right, the other party is wrong. And so one analogy that is often given and I find illuminating. So as you can see here, I've got my Philadelphia Eagles paraphernalia. I'm a huge fan. I haven't gotten the new Super Bowl stuff yet. I'm waiting to determine to get the next pieces. But we sort of reason like sports fans in politics. So if somebody says, I'll just run with this. This is Jalen Hurts, a top 5 quarterback in the NFL after winning the Super Bowl. I say, sure, of course. This is what it means to be a good Philadelphia Eagles fan. If I didn't have this belief, I would be a bad Philadelphia Eagles fan. Does that mean it's correct? I think it is, but I might be subject to bias. Or you have a debate. Who's the greatest of all time in the NBA? LeBron or Jordan? Well, if you go to Chicago, people are going to say Jordan. If you go to, Cleveland, they'll say LeBron. Just because that's what it is to be a good fan of Cleveland, of the Cleveland Cavaliers, is to believe that LeBron is better than Jordan. That doesn't mean that that's correct or that you've arrived at that conclusion through, unbiased reasoning processes. It's just, this is how you express your allegiance to your city or your team. And the same is true of politics. We affirm what our party believes to show that we're good members of that party. We're good sort of teammates.
Yeah, yeah. And it seems that the identity is wrapped up in a lot of the decision making, and almost as if you would have to ignore specific aspects of the truth in order to reinforce the self-situated identity that you have. It seems like it's necessary for us to make these conclusions because there's an infinite amount of information out there too as well, right? There's always an infinite amount of counter arguments, so there's an infinite amount of information, and us not knowing not only our blind spots but also sort of those unknown unknowns, those kind of worst possible blind spots, seems to be an issue at hand in such a complex world. And so I guess I want to talk about that on the individual level at some point, but I also want to get your take on Congress, because I think that right now it seems that Congress has really lost a lot of its identity. It's been sort of absorbed into the MAGA movement, and I know we had a conversation before we jumped on about the State of the Union last night, and I watched every second of it. You didn't bother watching it, and you were probably the smarter. You were definitely the smarter person for it. I'm just waiting for Epstein lists, and I want to hear about Gaza, Trump Gaza resorts and casinos. But I didn't hear any of that last night. But it seems like, with Mike Johnson right there behind the president, sort of shaking his head, like he's on board with everything. And 3 years ago, 5 years ago, tariffs would have been forebodden by that side. A lot of this sort of rhetoric would have been forebodden by this side, and now we're seems like the House certainly, and probably the Senate, are lockstep with the president, probably out of fear, strategic, and probably right fear, but also it seems like there's not a lot of pushback there. And so I guess my question for you is that there's these lurking unknown unknowns there. And when you have sort of this unification of the tripartite political system like we're seeing in DC right now, what do we need to be watching for in that environment before we say like look, there's going to be an issue with this or this? Like how do we read it from afar, and how do you read it?
Yeah, well, if I may self promote a little bit, yeah. So I didn't watch the State of the Union, but one of my books is called "Why It's Okay to Ignore Politics," and so if I did watch, I would be hypocritical. So I didn't watch. Yeah,
That's true.
so I think
Do you know? Do you know who Trump? Do you know who President Trump is?
I do know. I know a few
Okay.
people. I know Trump. There you go. Yeah, that's right. There you go.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
but yeah, so I think the tariff example is really interesting. So there is this pretty well established principle. So like you said, there are absolutely strategic dimensions at play here. But there's also this pretty well established finding in political psychology that people follow the party rather than policies or principles. I think tariffs are a really interesting case. Sort of immigration attitudes are also an interesting case. So you can go on YouTube and you can see debates. I think it was like 1980 Republican primaries. It was Reagan Bush, I guess. And they were very, maybe not open borders, but they were much friendlier to immigration than the current Republican Party, or, tariffs, free trade. So now you actually have Democrats who are sort of negatively polarized in favor of free trade, because Republicans have now come out in defense of tariffs. And I think this is just this really interesting dynamic here where it's like the arguments haven't really changed. I mean, the arguments for free trade are pretty old, and there's not been a whole lot of movement there. And so you say, well, why would people shift in this one direction rather than another, or endorse these arguments rather than these other arguments? It's not really that the evidence has changed or the arguments have changed. It's just that their party has changed. And so we go ahead and follow our party. So again, not to belabor the sports analogy, but it's like when a player gets traded to your team, you immediately become a fan of that player. It's not like
That's right.
principled exactly. It's just this is my team. And so I think that that's actually really important when it comes to understanding political behavior, not just among ordinary citizens, but also among politicians, where people are like, well, how can you think this? You used to say that, like, it's so hypocritical. It's like, I mean, maybe it is hypocritical, but it's not surprising that when people's party shifts, that they themselves shift. And I think when you understand that, a lot of what we've seen over the last few years makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like a lot of what we, I guess, believe in. So I'm in a building right now. There's trusses above me. There's all sorts of loads and calculations I can't do, but engineers that are smarter than me did those calculations, I believe. And so I believe on authority that this roof will not collapse while we're doing this interview. And so I think a lot of the things in government are like that. We're trusting others who know about a specific subset of information. There's some competency that's derived from that subset over multiple iterations, and we believe in them. I think about someone like an Elon Musk. There, I'm not going to debate Elon Musk. I'm not ever going to say anything he does with rockets is going to be wrong, just technically, because I don't know anything about rockets. Same thing with lithium ion batteries or brain chips. Um, but at some level, it seems that there's got to be end to the breadth of the competency of even someone like that, where we need to take a step back and look and discover we can't believe everything they say based off of authority. Um, what is the role of believing things on authority, whether it be party lines, or someone like Trump, for instance, on his ability to negotiate, which I don't think anyone denies that he's had some success negotiating in his career, um, versus us taking a step back and saying, like, look, we can't believe everything he says on this one domain of expertise, because, you know, may, you know, how do we judge? I guess another question way to phrase this: how do we judge the area of competency that we give someone authority over, and we take that authority as truth?
I love that question. And the point, too, that just because somebody's an authority in one domain doesn't mean that they're an authority in another domain. So, yeah, so other examples are when you have, actors and directors pontificating about politics, and you're like, look, maybe you know a lot about cinematography. I don't even really know exactly what cinematography is, but I know it's a word that's tossed around when people talk about these. So maybe you have authority on this stuff, but that doesn't mean you have expertise on trade policy. Why would you? But I like the broader point, which is, I mean, there are only so many hours in a day. And so you could, spend all your time studying the blueprints of your building and maybe develop that expertise, but why would that be worth your while? And so you do have to go to somebody and say, hey, look, I trust your judgment, that you know what you're doing. And so I'll let you go forward with this. And I think the same thing is true, I mean, in a lot of cases, not just politics. So you go to your doctor and your doctor says, oh, this is what I would prescribe for this condition. You say, okay, I don't have time to research it, but I trust you. So then the question becomes, well, how do you know which experts to trust? How do you know which authorities to trust? I mean, one thing in politics is you might want to say, look, I'm scrutinizing my own values. You say, like, look, here's what I think about trade or abortion or the death penalty or taxation, and then find maybe not even people, but say think tanks that align with your values. So I'm a libertarian, and so I've thought a lot about these issues, but I don't track every single policy debate, all these sorts of things. But I could, for instance, go to the Cato Institute and say, all right, these people have values that align with mine. They're paying much closer attention to the sort of day-to-day politics than I am, so I'll trust them.
Why did I write this book? A life full of meaning, achievement, and hope often seems unreachable for Western men. But now in these pages, an offer is lurking, waiting, expecting, daring. Daring you to seize it. This is an offer to give up being a victim to forever arise a victor. I want you to imagine your best possible future self and ask, what if I took a risk instead of taking a pass? What if one win could wash away all my weaknesses? What worthy enemy am I avoiding? What would I do if I knew I could never fail? Imagine it: unbeatable focus, unstoppable passion, incredible resilience, true honor, flourishing family, and more, much more. Everything you need for a life of true and deep meaning. The once impossible is now accessible in 9 steps. You see, I want to rip away the comfort now enslaving your potential. I had to discover the steps the hard way, hidden where I least wanted to look, and the abandoned genius of ancients, the hard-won wisdom of warriors, the overlooked art of the masters, and not surprisingly, within my own failures. To walk these steps is to undergo a profound evolution, as I personally experienced and now I share for the first time. Your personal journey begins now. Transformation starts with a single step.
Author Rick Walker has over 25 years' experience in strategy, investing, and global negotiations. 1 million men have benefited from his lectures and interviews with the most accomplished leaders alive. Now it's your turn. He learned from his failures and successes in his 20s and 30s as he scaled multiple businesses and nonprofits across dozens of countries, simultaneously, building better coalitions and destroying dysfunctional ones. That's why, for years, the world's elite have privately sought Rick's proven steps, self-improvement tools, and life turnaround principles in their deepest struggles.
So from the ashes of unemployment I rose, not just to work again, but to build the employment of thousands. From heartbreak's hollow echo I learned not just to love again, but to lavish it without limit. From wandering lost in the wilderness, I found not just a path, but a purpose that burns eternal. So, what do I want for you? What do I want to see after you read this work? I wish to see you rise, invigorated by love, to live with purpose, to strike with fire, to emerge from shadow into glorious light, to love boldly beyond mere affection, to journey toward eternal meaning, to wield courage in the face of darkness, to slay the evil you see in the world, to be forged into ferocity no storm could ever silence, and to never, never go back. So it's your turn to unlock your mind, to seize happiness, then to deserve power by taking up the responsibility that you've been avoiding. Let me be your guide so that you too can build a life of true meaning in 9 steps. Available everywhere beginning July 5th in print, ebook, and audiobook. Visit rickwalker.com.
I think also, like more generally, one interesting test, this is kind of harder to do in politics than in other domains, is you should be less trusting of authorities who face no costs for being wrong. So if your building collapses, and that's a cost for you, but that's a big cost for the person who designed it and built it. So they have a very, very strong incentive to be right. In politics, that incentive is a lot weaker, especially when you're looking at, say, like TV commentators. So they make predictions about what's going to happen and so on and so on. But is it like, do they get fired, for example, if they make incorrect predictions? Probably not. They probably get rewarded insofar as they're entertaining and draw viewers. So a good rule of thumb is if somebody faces no penalty for being consistently incorrect, you should be a little bit skeptical at a minimum about what they're telling you.
Yeah, I think in business we use these RACI matrices where you've got different people that are itemized for responsibility, authority, to be consulted on decision, and then also to be informed of decisions. And so, ideally, in an organization, you have some sort of correlation between the responsibility and the authority. That if you're asking me for authority to do something, you should also carry the responsibility. It seems like that's a little bit what you're talking about there, and it seems like the responsibility. I think I read this in your book. The responsibility and authority as a voter may not be as intertwined because it's hard to be I guess, a participation worthy voter. Walk us through some of your argument there about that notion about how difficult it is to be kind of a well-informed voter.
Yeah, there are 2 main issues, I think, to becoming an informed voter or a good voter, you might say. So one is just you have to acquire a decent amount of information to cast a good vote. So when you think about, so just take a simple case, if you're voting for a presidential candidate, there are all sorts of issues that that presidential administration is going to have an impact on. So again, trade, immigration, the death penalty, taxation, regulation, schools, the environment, and so on and so forth down the line. That's just a lot of stuff. And to even become minimally informed about those issues takes a decent amount of time. But then there's this further problem, which is suppose you do try to acquire information about those issues. Are you processing it in an unbiased way? Or, as we were sort of talking about earlier, are you just believing all of the evidence that tells you, oh yeah, my side has it right, and ignoring all of the information that would tell you that your side is wrong? If you're doing that, then you're not actually becoming a good voter. So to return to the jury analogy, if you only believed the evidence that suggested this person was guilty and just sort of dismissed everything that suggested that this person was innocent, you're not really doing your job as a juror. And really, voters don't do either of these 2 things. So for the most part, they don't acquire the information. And even if they do, it's almost surely going to be information that they process in a biased way. It's just sort of information that they can use to demonstrate that their side is right and the other is wrong. And what's particularly interesting about this is that there is an important sense in which voters are acting rationally. So economists sometimes talk about rational ignorance. Brian Kaplan in particular talks about rational irrationality. This is how sort of being biased can be rational. And the idea here is essentially this. If you cast a vote for the wrong candidate, the worst candidate, the cost is very, very minimal. It's virtually zero because your vote has no impact on the winner of the election. So regardless of who you voted for, the outcome will be whatever it would be with or without your vote. So you have really no incentive to become well informed, and you don't really have any incentive to process the information in an unbiased way. And you might actually have an incentive to process it in a biased way. So if you're a lifelong Republican or a lifelong Democrat, you have this very unbiased review of the evidence. You say, oh my goodness, I've been wrong my whole life. Let me switch parties. That can actually come at a personal and social cost. So maybe the friends that you have in that party start to dislike you. And so you bear this personal cost, and there's not really any benefit to casting a good vote because it's not going to change the outcome of the election. And the problem is every voter is sort of doing the same thing. They're not really well informed. They're not really unbiased. And so we just elect leaders on the basis of uninformed or biased votes.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think of something like the sunk cost fallacy, that switching parties dilemma there, that it seems is fairly rare. And you look at someone like RFK, for instance, who I don't think he's technically switched parties, but I think he's probably more of an independent now. Just totally disregarded by his old party for that. It was one of those severe cases of him losing a lot of what he had built up over a lifetime, over a career within that domain. Where do you think we go from here? Like, is there a process or a methodology that would improve this system, that would either require us as voters to be better informed, or is there maybe an alternative type of government that you would propose that would sort of alleviate this need? Because it seems very burdensome for me to have to learn about all of this.
Yeah. So there are political theorists and political philosophers have suggested sort of alternate ways of trying to overcome this information problem. I mean, so one issue is you're sort of fighting math. So you say, depending on where you live, I think your best odds of changing the winner of the election are like 1 in 10 million. I think in DC it's like 1 in 200 trillion. And so an analogy that I sometimes give is it's like, oh shoot! I can't remember. It's like who was like the king of England in 1171 or whatever. Like I'll ask my class, and nobody knows. I'm like, well, why do you not know? And it's like, well, why would I need to know that information? And I say, okay, well, suppose I said there was like a 1 in 200 trillion chance that I was going to give you a quiz tomorrow on British royal history. Would you study? And I'm like, no, like not for a 1 in 200 trillion chance of a payoff. Like I'm not going to do that. And so like here again, this goes to the rationality point. That is rational to not study up on that. And so it's also rational. And so like there's not really a fix for that. I mean, one thing that sort of one line of argument that I'm sympathetic to is this is just a reason to sort of take more and more sort of activities and projects outside of the domain of government and put them more in the private sector. So you're not fighting math. So, when you buy a car, it's very rational for you to acquire information. So if you buy a car that's unsafe or very expensive or it's not reliable, you bear the cost of that. You have to pay the money. You have to pay for the repairs. If the car breaks down, it's going to cost you a lot of time. And so you have this very strong incentive to know what you're getting into when you buy a car. And car manufacturers know this. And so they build very good cars because customers kind of keep them accountable, whereas voters don't. And so one sort of simple fix is wherever it's feasible to move something out of the government sector and into the private sector, we should expect better results from doing so. Simple case would be something like school choice. Let sort of parents shop around for schools in the same way that they shop around for cars. We can expect to get better results. At the personal level, like what we could do as individuals, I mean, you talked about this point about identity, and I think that's really central to it. So politics has become so central to so many people's sense of who they are. So it's not just, I go to the polls, I vote for the person who I think will be best for the country, and then I get on with my life. No, now you have people who say, like, I don't want to live in the same neighborhood as a Democrat or Republican. I don't want to marry an out party member. I don't want my kids dating out party members. I don't want to work with them, and so on and so forth. I think that's really bad. that we're now at this point. It's really bad for a variety of reasons. I mean, one of which is if you sort of put yourself in this bubble and you only hang out with people who tell you that you're right, you're never going to correct yourself if you're wrong. You're never going to get the information that you need. It also does things like increase social conflict. It diminishes social trust. And so something we can do as individuals, this sounds, it's like sort of cliche, but I think there's wisdom in it. Like, find people who don't agree with you about politics, but sort of form bonds with them on a non-political basis first. So, grab a beer with them and watch TV, go bowling, whatever you want to do, and sort of develop a friendly relationship with members of the other party. And then I think it becomes more feasible to try to bridge this gap politically, where you say, hey, like, you voted for this guy, but like, I'm not quite sure, like, what did you see in this candidate? Like, tell me what I'm missing. And I think that's sort of one way of sort of overcoming this this sort of silo that we've put ourselves in politically. And sort of related to that, I think it would be good if we just made politics less central to our sense of self, where we say, look, this is important. We're talking about how the country is governed. But like my sense of who I am is not that I'm a Democrat or Republican or a libertarian or whatever. Like, I'm a parent, I'm like a sibling, I'm a teacher, I'm a writer, whatever. Like, that's who I am. And so if you tell me that my politics are wrong, I don't feel like my very sense of self is under attack. I'm actually open to being corrected. And so if I can actually share this really interesting finding on this point.
Yeah.
So I forget exactly who ran this experiment, but the experimenters got political partisans. So they got Republicans and they got Democrats, and they hooked them up to an fMRI machine to see which regions of their brain lit up when they were asked certain questions. And they started by asking them for their beliefs about non-political issues. One was who invented the light bulb. And most people would say Thomas Edison. But apparently Thomas Edison did not invent the light bulb. Somebody else invented the light bulb. And the experimenter said, no, you're wrong. It was actually this other person. It was not Thomas Edison. And the political partisan said, okay, fine. I guess Edison didn't invent the light bulb. But then they asked the political partisans political questions. So like, what do you think the effect of like criminalizing abortion is on like abortion rates and like really highly charged political issues? And then they would give their answers, and then the experimenters would correct them when they were wrong. So we would say, no, you actually have this false belief about this political issue, in the way they might have had this false belief about who invented the light bulb. But unlike the light bulb case, where they sort of shrugged and they were like, yeah, okay, fine, I was wrong about who invented it, the fMRI machines like lit up in certain brain regions that showed the experimenters that the subject's very sense of self was under attack. So one analogized it. They said, if we were monitoring them when they were attacked, if they were attacked by a bear, the same brain regions would light up. It's like my life is at stake here if I'm wrong about politics. In the same way, my life would be at stake if a bear were chasing me. I think it's just really, really unhealthy for a whole variety of reasons. I mean, one of which is if that's how tightly you hold on to your political beliefs, then you're never going to let go of them if it's determined that you're wrong. You're just going to say, no, I'm like, this is who I am. I'm a Democrat. I'm a Republican. And nothing you say can change my mind. That's unhealthy for you. And that's certainly unhealthy for the country.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it seems that the necessity to direct attention and awareness to specific topics. So, for instance, the Wuhan lab leak has been sort of a hot topic in certain corners over the last 2 or 3 years, and I probably just got banned for saying that. But it's probably been a hotter topic. So people tend to do some research. There's probably a lot of biased research in there, but they've done some research in there, and you see someone like RFK that's taken some of the hits for that. But it seems that the more that we can direct, maybe the media directs attention to a certain topic, the better informed, or at least the more articulate a voter may be on that topic, with hopes that it'll get some attention. But something interesting seems to be happening as well at the same time as there's these kind of spike up type of topics that happen on occasion every couple of years like that. There is also this diversification, this bifurcation of the left being further left, the right being further right, and the libertarian extreme is going to, I guess, new levels in certain, not new levels. It's more traditional. I think more conservative than the other two perspectives. But there's at least a widening there of what the um, sort of the area of normalcy would have been traditionally within the the traditional two party system. And so we have the attention that's being focused on a singular element that's probably driven by a lot of narrative from whatever algorithmic type of feed that these people are seeing on Twitter or wherever it might be. But then you also sort of have this widening because people are trying to get attention to themselves. At the same time, we're told to pay attention to the specific topic, the Epstein files, whatever it might be. And we dive into that. All of a sudden, we're experts on DNA and RNA and everything else. And so it seems like there's a lot of waffling that's happening within society now. Where does this end? Where does this end with the left going further left, the right going further right, and this idea of the us doing deep dives on the singular topics, but it's all based off of sort of highly algorithmic types of data sets.
Yeah, I wish I knew where it ended. I mean, my sense is not somewhere good, but I have noticed the same phenomenon where it's every 2 weeks or every month where there's a new news cycle, everybody becomes an expert on that new thing, and so like this is just here again, like it's totally fine to say I don't know. It's weird that people are allergic to this. Like, I'm happy to say I don't know. Like, why would I don't know everything. Like, so I think that's like one thing you could do. But yeah, I mean, not to here again. I know this sounds like a cliche, but I do think social media has made things worse, where we really are in our bubble, and so we think we're experts because we're just we're being fed information, but it tends to be information that tells us what we want to hear, that confirms that our side is correct, because that's what you want to click on. It's like you open up Twitter, and if every single post you saw was like, you're an idiot, you're bad, your side is bad, your side is dumb, you would shut it down pretty quickly. That's not an entertaining use of your time. It feels much better to be told, oh, you're right, your side is good. And so you hear this enough and you don't see the other side, then pretty soon you're like, I know everything. And so anybody who disagrees with me is an idiot, because how could anybody disagree with me? All of the information is on my side. And the attention getting point is really important too. You don't get a lot of attention by having very calm and measured claims. If you're like, oh, I think, if we tweak this regulation a little bit, we'll get slightly higher GDP growth. I like posts like that, but I'm weird. I think most people are like, the economy is doomed, or like the America is saved. Like, that's what gets clicks. That's what people are incentivized to say, because they want to get the clicks. And this just makes it worse. Like you said, you might get more extremes. There's this other interesting phenomenon too, which is not just about social media, but sort of, I don't know, human expression in general, which is you sort of demonstrate your loyalty to your side more convincingly the more extreme your view is. So just to give like a really simple case, so like suppose somebody's in a cult and wants to demonstrate their loyalty to the cult and the cult leader, and the cult leader says, tweaking this regulation a little bit will increase GDP. And the cult member's like, yeah, okay, good. Like, dear leader, you're right on that. It's like, whatever. That's no big deal. If the cult leader says, no, 2 + 2 = 5. And then the cult member's like, yes, dear leader, 2 + 2 does equal 5. That signals that cult member is super committed to the cult, because they're willing to believe this really crazy and plausible. Like, that's how committed they are. They'll believe this crazy stuff. And so in politics, I mean, here again, hopefully this stuff is like largely online and not so much carried over to the real world. But, you'll see people being like, oh, Stalin was actually good. And like, I hope they're not sincere in that. But you could say, like, saying Stalin was good, in fact. I mean, to state something that is so implausible shows, wow, this is how committed you are to the anti-capitalist cause, or whatever the case may be. But then you could see how that drives extremism, because then people have this motivation to, at the very least, express their endorsement of these really extreme claims. And then other people might be like, oh, this person believes it, and so maybe there's actually good reason to believe it, and so on. And so like here again with a lot of the online discourse where it's just all like I'm signaling who I am and what political team I belong to and how strongly I endorse that team, you do have these kind of perverse incentives to endorse really extreme claims, which again can drive extremism.
Does it seem to you, this is sort of off topic here, but does it seem to you that there hasn't been any great, like any just really excellent cults for like the last 30 years? Like you
You
used to hear
know,
about cults all the time. They used to be all over the place.
that I hadn't thought about that. I'm trying to think. Yeah, like when it was like a 90s phenomenon, I feel like there were a lot of
Yeah.
cults. So that's actually a very interesting question. I'm curious what maybe it does have something to do where people are now getting this sense of belonging and meaning from like their online communities. Perhaps I don't know,
Yeah.
but that's actually a great point. I'm trying to think of the last time there was like a cult that made the news. I can't think of it.
Yeah, like a really smart cult with a guy that's got a bunch of wives that lives out somewhere on some secure commune, well resourced.
Yeah.
Maybe he's got some sort of like really ingenuitive type of perspective on whoever the Messiah might be, like something that's just kind of a good traditional, strong, persuasive cult. I just haven't seen
Yeah.
anything lately.
It's been like 20 or 30 years. That's yeah. That's a really that's really an interesting like observation. It's been a very long time. Yeah, they don't make cults like they used to apparently, like the ones I grew up with.
That's true. That's very true. All right. Why I digress. I want to talk about writing process. Obviously, you've done a lot of writing, the Washington Post and Libertarianism.org, and you've got the two books. Walk me through your sort of your writing process. It's a day when you've got to work on a book, for instance. When are you writing? When are you thinking? Um, Caffeine, exercise. Like, give me the whole thing. Like, what has to be in place for you to have the best possible output to bring your book to the next step?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of like really sort of brass tacks, so this is advice that I got in graduate school from a professor of mine, David Schmitz. He said, "Look, do the most important thing first." And so, if you're writing a book or you're writing a dissertation, do that first. So get up in the morning, get breakfast, grab a cup of coffee, and then sit down and get a half hour of writing done, an hour of writing done, whatever works for you, and just do that every single day and chip away at it, and you'll make much more progress than you might think. And so one thing that I've found particularly helpful is taking that advice where you say, okay, every morning. That's the first thing that's the first priority is getting the writing done, and then having in addition to sort of input goals. So that's sort of an input goal where you say, all right, every single day I'm going to put in, say, 2 hours at the computer. And then if I want to go beyond that, like, cool, but I get my 2 hours in and then I can move on to other things if I want to. That's sort of the input. But you also have to sort of track your outputs as well. So it's not going to do you any good to sit down for 2 hours every day at 8 o'clock in the morning and crank something out, but then never actually produce the book or the article or something like that. So you say, okay, I have a very concrete goal. Let's say by the end of this month, I will have this article finished and ready to submit wherever I want it to go. And then if you notice that deadline is creeping up and you are not on track to meet that output goal, then you have to ratchet up your input goal so that you're sure you can do it. So I mean, that's in terms of like the routine, that's really it. Is I forget who it was, like some writer said like the art of writing is the art of like affixing your butt to a seat, something like that. And I really think that's like 90% of it is just, sit down and get the writing done. Another sort of, I think, pitfall that young writers have is they have too much anxiety, like that they're not good enough. And so that they'll have something that's like good, but then they'll tinker with it for months and months before they do anything with it. And my advice is always, when you think it's 95% ready, do something with it. So send it out, because you could spend 6 months trying to finish that 5% and make it perfect. You're never going to make it perfect. That's impossible. So when you think it's almost ready, say, all right, I'm sending off the email, I'm submitting it, online or sending it off, whatever. just do it. And you might get, you might get a rejection, you might get negative commentary, but I think by and large, it's easy to lose a lot of time to trying to make something perfect when that's impossible and not a particularly efficient use of your time. And I would say one last thing, and I think this might be idiosyncratic, so it might not work for everyone, but I try never to let an idea go to waste. Meaning, if I'm I don't know, uh, watching TV or going for a walk or something, and I'm like, oh, here's an idea for a paper, or here's something I could add to something that I'm working on. I just shoot myself an email with like the basic outline of the idea, and then I save it somewhere in a Word document. And it doesn't even have to be something that I'm writing on at the time. It could just be like a stray idea that I think is interesting. And the reason that helps me is because it gives me kind of a never ending pipeline of ideas. So by the time I actually sit down to write an article or a book, I know a lot of what I already want to say because I have this Word document that's basically a collection of notes on the topic. And so the actual writing process is sort of putting those notes in a coherent, clear order. But and that I think is, for me at least, is very sort of efficient. It's almost like a division of labor where you have the idea creation stage, which can happen at any time, and then there's the sit at the computer stage where you're looking at your notes and collecting it. And then that way, like I said, once you finish this one paper, you've got this other Word document with a collection of ideas that you can use for your next paper.
And so a book like Why It's Okay to Ignore Politics, it seems like you're taking knowledge that you've accumulated over the years in various disparate types of domains and trying to make it more accessible for those of us that are not experts in that area. And so you're trying to take maybe sophisticated ideas, maybe not sophisticated to you, but they're sophisticated people like me, and try to make them accessible. So when you're working on a project like that, sort of a project to make it to make an idea broader, for broader appeal, mass appeal. Um, what's going through your mind? What do the revisions look like? And also sort of like what are you ingesting any information whatsoever during that time?
So one thing is I try to I appreciate that thought, because I do try to make things accessible. Where my thought is like, look, if I'm writing a book, I want it to be read by I do want it to be read by academics, but I also want it to be read by non-academics, and so you do have to write in a certain style to make that possible. So one sort of really easy trick to use is just, if I'm like rereading this, if I'm like rereading a draft of something I wrote to myself, and I realize, wait, I don't quite understand what I meant here, or I'm quoting another author, I'm like, I don't quite understand. Then like I sort of have to break it down further. But more generally, to make ideas accessible, I just sort of talk to non-academics. So a good rule of thumb is, if you could chat with your barista or a bartender, and they could say, oh yeah, I get what you're saying, then you're on the right track. If they look at you with a confused look, then you've got a problem because you haven't made it clear enough. And I really do think, you know, maybe for certain fields, like if you're doing like high level math, that's never going to work. But for the things that I talk about, so ethics, politics, and economics, like you really should be able to explain it in a way that your bartender or your barista can understand. And like I mean that in a quite literal sense. So you could say, hey, like I want to chat, like I don't know, you're at the gym with someone and you're like, hey, let me run this idea by you. And if they get it, that's a good sign. And if they don't, then you have to go back to the drawing board.
Do you ever interface, or I guess interleave the written word and the spoken word? So let me give you an example. I'm I just finished a book project. Hopefully, we'll bring it to market the next 60 to 90 days. And one of the editors said, "Hey, Rick, the the book needs, like, you need to listen to the book as well as read it." And so I started using an app called Speechify, which is incredible. It's a game changer where I can hear the rhythms of the words that I just wrote, because so I'll know what it sounds like on the audiobook, but also it's easier to be able to detect issues. So he's saying make the written word spoken. And then I went through David Perel. I don't know if you're he has a writing class. He's got a great podcast. Went through his class a few months ago on online writing, so sort of abbreviated writing, and he said that all writing should begin as spoken. And so he's a big advocate for having your, like, going for a walk and talking in your phone and have that transcribed, and that's sort of the start for your written word. Um, do you have any sort of theories or experience or thoughts on the idea of sort of the interoperability of the written word versus the spoken word when it comes to sort of writing in the creative world?
Yeah, I love that question because that's actually, it connects to a piece of advice I give my students. I say, all right, you got a draft of your paper and you've written it and you want to know if, like, how well does it read? And I say, here's what you do. Read it out loud. Ideally to somebody else in the room, but if you don't have somebody else, you can just read it out loud. And if you read it out loud and it sounds weird, then it's going to sound weird when somebody reads it. And so revise it in light of that. So just like really simple cases are, sometimes you'll have really stilted or old fashioned language like I shall demonstrate, blah, blah, blah. And I say, if you were in a conversation with someone at a party, would you ever say I shall demonstrate? Probably not. I would never say something like that. So like, I'll show that, like, that's what I would say. And then that's how I write it. And I think even just like this kind of casual conversational style makes the writing much more accessible. So a rule of thumb that I follow for myself is if it doesn't sound good when you say it out loud, then it's not what you should put down on the page when you're writing. And I'm not sure exactly like how, like, why that seems to work the way it does, but it is something that I've noticed in my own writing and the writing of other people. It's like, you got to read it out. You got to say it out loud before you know if you actually want to write it that way.
Do you consider yourself a student of writing? Like, are you reading books or have you read books about writing?
When I was younger, in grad school, I read some books on writing. Now, I don't know. I guess I'm too busy to keep up with the latest. But I do think that those I'm trying to think of like Elements of Style. I know everybody. I mean, that's a classic. You can't go wrong with that. That's the main one that comes to mind. But yeah, when I was younger, I definitely devoured a lot of those writing books, and they can be very helpful.
Yeah, yeah. I think I had one of my very close friends gave me a writing book by Klinkenborg. I think he's a professor, maybe one of the editors at maybe New York Times, somewhere like that. One of the big hoity-toity types of print publications. But he has this great book on um, basically letters make words and words make sentences and sentences make paragraphs, paragraphs make books. And so you've got to do whatever you can to take out words and even letters from your sentences. And so he seems to be an advocate for one word sentences, 1 and 2 word sentences. And so he says, go ahead and take your book and put all the sentences on a single line, so you can see the length of the sentences, visually, and then try to make each of them shorter, but also sort of have some variation there. Like, you don't want to have 7 2 word sentences. You want to
Yeah.
have a 2 word, 2 word, 2 word, maybe a 12 word, 2 word, and you got to vary it there. So I wrote a whole book like that, and the editor was like, "Where the hell did you?" I told you you could write like this. So I read this book. He said, "Rick, did you read the other 20 books the guy wrote?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, he has a style. He's talking about a very specific part of the style." He said, "You got to read all the stuff." And so I made an error there. But it seems like a lot of the online writing has gone towards simplification and sort of I guess it would be sort of a minimalistic type of prose. And it seems like we didn't see that as much, 15 or 20 years ago. Probably when you and I were reading a lot more than we are now. What do you think? Do you think we're going the right way with writing, or do you think we're always a society?
Well, so first, let me ask: did you revise that book, or did you stick with the original style?
Man, it was a nightmare. Okay, so I this is so embarrassing, so I got to share it. I got it up to it's a 900-page book. It was insane, and I sent it off to the first group of beta readers. The first 200 pages, and they're like, "Rick, this is unreadable." Like, what do you mean it's unreadable? They said it's just not. It's we can't read. It's too difficult to read. And I was doing different. It was a philosophical slash religious type of work, and I was using triple and quadruple entendres to make points. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm giving you a 4 word sentence, and you're getting like 16 words of value out of it. How cool is this? Well, it was unreadable. So I ended up just tossing the whole thing. I tossed 95% of it and scraped back 5% of it, rewrote it, and used it in this new book that were coming out. But it was just a complete and utter disaster.
I don't know. It sounds like the original would be the sort of thing. Maybe it might not be appreciated initially, but as people dig into it, then the insight is revealed. But yeah,
Maybe
like
so.
once they do like a deep dive and they actually get the depth, then it would be more appreciated. But yeah, so like yeah, so it's tough for me sometimes as an academic. So when I'm writing like a journal article in particular, there's a very sort of specific way you have to like hedge everything. You have to be super, super careful, and you want to have to allow for every single exception. You have to be as precise as possible. But if you're writing just a Substack, for example, where you're not just writing for other academics, nobody's going to read that. And it kind of pains me sometimes where I write a sentence where I don't have the 10 hedges or the 10 exceptions, and I just have to make a bald assertion. I don't really like that. It pains me as an academic, but I do think that's what you need to do. And then when you talk about like tweeting, like you, yeah, I mean, I don't know how many characters you have. It's not a ton. And so they're like subtlety and nuance and precision, very, very difficult. So in some sense, so I think there's good and there's bad. So I think the bad is if you're getting your analysis from tweets, there's not going to be enough detail. There's not going to be enough sophistication and subtlety. So that can be very bad. On the other hand, I think one thing that is kind of cool about a lot of online writing is if you find the right writer or the right set of writers, they can make important and sophisticated ideas really accessible in a way that they might not have been 20 years ago. So now you don't have to write for the New York Times to have an audience. And so you could write about economics or current affairs, something like that in your Substack. You could do it pretty well. I mean, I've seen some really nice Substacks out there and have a decent audience. So they don't have to buy anything physical, and in some cases they might not have to pay at all. So I think that's the benefit. Is it really has democratized access to good writing. The trick is figuring out who to read and who not to read, which is not always easy. But so yeah, there are definitely pros and cons to this shift towards online writing.
What do you think about Substack? I'm not on Substack. I just have a little blog on my website. What do you think about Substacks? I know you're using it, and also what do you think about the discovery engine on it?
I don't know. Tell me more about the discovery engine. I don't know about that.
Well, I think that there's a way. I don't even use Substack to read, but I think there's a way that you can discover. It'll show you different writers that you maybe weren't familiar with, and introduce you to different writers.
Okay. Well, that's okay.
I think.
My ignorance of that reveals how infrequently I'm using Substack, unfortunately. So I have one. I don't write as much as I should. I'll write a post and then I'll post it and get out of there. So I should know some of this stuff. So I don't do it as often as I would like, because like I said, I do sort of like writing for a non-academic audience in a lot of cases. I use it for these kind of middle cases where I want to say more than I could in a tweet, but I don't want to write a full-on academic article about it. So it's kind of the sweet spot there where I think, oh, okay, I have this thought about, I don't know, price gouging. Like I've written some stuff on price gouging. It's like, I can't really write an academic article about this. It's too long for a tweet, but like, I think it's sort of an interesting insight. And, I've got I don't know how many subscribers I have, not a ton, but like that they might actually appreciate. So I don't use it in the way that a lot of people use it, where they'll do like really like long pieces on Substack and they do it every week or every 3 days, whatever the case may be. I'm sort of bad at it, where it's like, oh, whenever I have something that I think would work for it, I pop on there, post it, and then when the mood strikes me next, I'll do it again.
Yeah, and that's sort of a similar situation. I think some of us, we like to write shorter or longer. So, for instance, I tried to do a weekly newsletter for a long time, with with the corollary blog posts, And if you're asking me for 500 to 1,500 words, like I just don't have it. I definitely don't have it every week.
Yeah.
If you want 5,000 words and it's going to go into a book, no problem. You want 10,000, no problem.
Yeah.
But 500 to 1,500, no. It's especially if I told someone I would do it, or I'm expected to produce it. If you tell me I've got to have something by this deadline and there's no economic incentive and it's short form, I'm out. I don't know how are you on words and production and that sort of thing?
Well,
Schedule.
so part of the issue is, I mean, the incentive. So it's like my incentive is to, to write stuff for my job. So like
Yeah.
articles, books, and so on. So Substack is sort of a self-indulgence where it's like, I don't really know where this is going to fit, but I kind of want to get it out there. But to do it right, the people who do it right, they have a schedule. They do, they're sort of like journalists effectively, where they say, all right, every Friday or whatever, I have a post. I've done a ton of research on this and I'm writing, 2,000 words. And I just don't really have the time or motivation to do that. It would certainly be better for my Substack if I did, but yeah, it's tough to devote a whole lot of time to it. So like Twitter, the nice thing about it is you have a thought, you write it, and boom, it's out in 5 seconds. Academic articles, they take certainly a lot longer than Twitter and Substack, but like, that's my contribution for my job. And so I have very strong incentives to do that. And, I enjoy doing that as well. It scratches a different itch than, the Substack stuff. And so Substack is this kind of in between thing where it's like not Twitter, where I can't just shoot off a sentence. I actually have to put some thought into it. And it's like, if I'm putting a lot of thought into it, then maybe it should be a real article. And so it always ends up being this sort of, it's not quite a tweet. It's not quite an article. Let me just plop it into Substack. So for those listening, so now I think I've been too self-deprecating. I mean, feel free to check out my Substack, but it's not nearly as updated. It's not as regularly updated as it should be.
Yeah, yeah. And you made a comment, and we'll definitely link to that. You made a comment a little while ago about the need for your journal writing to be very specific. And there's been a big trend the last 15 years. People removing was it adjectives, whatever it might be, moving these descriptive types of terms. I say I don't even know the word. These descriptive terms from the sentences to make them a little bit more readable and sort of remove the wordiness of that. And by doing that, if I say that the dog was there instead of the brown dog was there, I remove words, but I also remove specificity from it. And so it seems like maybe our world is devolving a little bit into a less specific type of world for the ease of sort of the comfortability and the ease of readability, especially on platforms like X. But I mean, you've been working with students for a while. Are you seeing that trend in the areas that you're working? Are students a little bit less interested in specificity and more interested in sort of readability and lackadaisical types of approaches to their the writing, which maybe was more technical, 20, 30 years ago?
Why did I write this book? A life full of meaning, achievement, and hope often seems unreachable for Western men. But now in these pages, an offer is lurking, waiting, expecting, daring. Daring you to seize it. This is an offer to give up being a victim to forever arise a victor. Visit rickwalker.com.
So I want to think more about the specificity point. I haven't noticed that, but I haven't been looking. That's interesting. I will keep an eye out for that. I think one thing so I do think, not just in students, I think almost everyone, writing has gotten a little less formal,
Yes.
which need not, it could be good, it could be bad, because I think sometimes, especially academics, they get too rigid, they get too formal, and that's not good. But also it's like, when you write YOU, but you just replace it with the letter, it's like we've gone too far. Like texting and Twitter have gone too far when they're changing our writing to that extent. But yeah, I have noticed. So, and I do think like social media and like texting has made a difference, because like that's when you think about like the typical person, what are they writing? That they're probably writing emails and they're probably writing texts. Like maybe they're on social media somewhere, like a Facebook post. Like that's their writing. And like that we're incentivized to take like all sorts of shortcuts on those sorts of things. And so it needn't be bad. So like I said, I like casual conversational writing. I think that's good. But it can be bad when it's like, if you're writing something for a general audience, you want it to be slightly more formal than a Facebook post. So there's a needle that we need to thread there.
Isn't the I agree 100%. Isn't sort of the compression of information also a unique thing? So you think of something like a meme. A meme, you've got these great memes that where we're using the same pictures or the same series of pictures that they use in all the memes, and they just re-articulate what's being said there. But to try to explain the meme takes 100 times more language data than it used to actually that was placed in the meme because there's so much thought and intent went behind creating it. But it seems like the meme is at least 10 years ago, 5-10 years ago, it was the definitive I guess communication marker that of virality in a lot of parts of the internet. Um, so it, I guess my question for you is do you sense that us as a society, it seems that we're getting less artistic, we've moved away from this architectural anyway pursuit of beauty. You used to have these beautiful cathedrals, beautiful churches, beautiful courthouses that went up everywhere. Now they're just sort of glass and metal. Seems like we're moving away from that. But then you have these oddities like the memes, like the what are like kind of the tradable artwork, the
Oh,
digital artwork.
NFTs. I'm still not really sure what those are, to be honest with you, but yeah, I see them popping up.
Yeah, what's the weird thing about these highly compressed pieces of art that have sort of an infinite amount of textual data that are associated with them, but those sort of trending in a society where we're trying to get, it seems like we're getting a little bit more minimalistic with our communication. I don't understand what's happening there.
I'm not sure if I do either. I mean, I'm going to sound like a grumpy old man because I guess that's what I am. But I do think part of it is a lack of attention span. And I mean, I even see this in myself now where it's like sitting. So, like to create, a great work of art, that takes a lot of time and a lot of patience and a lot of sitting still. And I find myself, if I'm reading a book or watching a movie, it's very difficult to stay focused on that and not reach for your phone and scroll through social media or check your emails. And so I'm not on TikTok. I'm not sure I even really know what TikTok is. I think it's like short video stuff. But so it's kind of interesting. I'll talk to like my students, my college students, and they're like, we don't watch TV anymore. I'm like, what do you mean you don't watch TV anymore? They're like, yeah, we just watch TikTok videos. I say, well, how long are those? They're like, I don't know. It could be like 2 to 5 minutes, 2 to 10 minutes or something like that. I don't know. But it's like, they're like, no, like 20, you can't sit still for 22 minutes to watch a TV show. You gotta do TikTok. And like memes, I think are a good example of this too. It's, you maybe read less than a sentence worth of texts. Like it's very, it's very quick and to the point. So I think a lot of the stuff that we're seeing now is just catering to this shorter attention span. And like I said, I am guilty of it myself too, where we have this instant gratification. You check your email, you get a like on a Facebook post, you get a little dopamine hit or whatever, and then you're like sitting for 2.5 hours through a movie. Like, are you kidding me? This is crazy. And it's bad. I mean, because like I was saying, a lot of most projects that are very worthwhile, they require a ton of patience. They require a lot of thinking and sitting still and like deliberately avoiding the kind of instant gratification that you might get from, checking your Twitter page. I don't know how we fix this. I mean, there are probably certain things we can do, like limiting access to smartphones in school and things like that. But by and large, I think it's sort of an individual problem that we have to fix, where it's like we set really strict limits with our own use, and we say like, look, I'm going to have to become comfortable being bored. And then eventually the book and the movie won't be so boring anymore because I'll have rehabilitated my attention span.
That's true. What attention span? I don't have one left anymore. I mean, it's everywhere I go. People are on multiple devices at the same time. They've got a phone, they've got another TV screen in front of them, and they can't If you ask, can I change the channel? That's not appropriate thing to ask. So I'm watching that. Well, no, you're watching your phone,
Well,
and so
yeah, no, and like in my house, we're constantly like one screen at a time. It's like one screen at a time, like, because it's the exact same thing. You got the TV going, you got the phone going, and it's like we're now at the point where like it's an achievement if we're only watching TV. Like that's a success. And so yeah, I've
yes.
got a lot of work to do.
So I have this theory, Chris, and I want you to verify this next time you're out driving. So I have this theory that the people that are on their phones while they're driving tend to be driving l- well below average cars and well above average cars. Um, and so my theory is that people think that the smarter that, from their own perspective, the smarter that they are, that they have the the infinitesimally impossible ability to have two attentions. That they can pay attention based off their IQ to their phone and to the road, and nothing's going to happen to them. I don't know if in one area of society that is, those are people that just aren't smart enough to realize that, or maybe they're just not that attentive, or maybe they don't have the some derivative of emotional and intellectual intelligence to realize that that's not a truism. But at the other level, I think there's ego that's driving these people, thinking that I'm the one person on planet Earth that has two attentions.
Yep.
I can split both equally, or I can mitigate. I can sort of frequency between the two. So I would like you to pay attention to that next time. And there's a potential Substack topic.
I love it. I will. I will take a look at that. And yeah, so I mean, there's a pretty well known bias where it's like everybody's like, no, 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 I'm the exception. So if you're like, no, you
Yes.
can't really multitask. You're really just kind of not paying attention to anything. Like, no, no, no. I know that's true of like 99% of people, but it's not true of me. Like, all right.
Yes.
And no, I know the driving stuff. It's really bad. And my daughter is a few years away from driving, and like it really is a totally different world, because the one thing I'm really trying to impress upon her is I'm just like, do not even don't even get in the habit of looking at it when you're like at a stoplight, like a red light. Just
Yes.
keep the phone away from you when you're driving. This is the number one sort of unbreakable rule that you need to have. Because yeah, you see, I mean, ultimately maybe it'll be moot because we'll have self-driving cars and then we can scroll to our heart's content. But yeah, you see the people like on the highway and they're going 80 and they've got like they think it's like, if I just take my eyes off the road for like 2 seconds to scroll, and then it turns into 4 seconds. And then you see those commercials where it's like, if you're driving 80, in 2 seconds, you've gone the length of a football field, or, whatever the case may be. And so, yeah, no, it's disturbing, because I think it's almost become the norm with like, here again, the grumpy old man, like the younger drivers, like they basically have the phone on them at all times, and they're paying attention to it while they really should be keeping their eyes on the road.
Yeah, yeah. And the dangerous thing is not that one person is not paying attention; it's that they have four other people not paying attention, driving all around them at 80 miles per hour. They're in a cluster of people, and so they're in a cluster of people that don't have their attention set to the primary mode. But anyways, speaking of human action, let's get into von Misesian Austrian economics, libertarianism. I think we probably have to at least discuss some serious topics other than the fun ones of writing. Where are you on the spectrum of your libertarianism, especially when it comes to economics, and where do you, I guess, where do you differ from most of us that are sort of acclimated or familiar with that sort of worldview?
So I'm pretty much a standard libertarian. So if you said like who's policy view, like who's fairly famous, who has policy views that are similar to mine, I would say somebody like Milton Friedman. So I'm not opposed to like a carbon tax. I think a carbon tax would probably be a good idea, although I know a lot of libertarians are like against a carbon tax. I'm also okay with like cash transfers as a replacement for things like Social Security and other sorts of entitlement programs. So here again, this was something that Milton Friedman talked about, where he said, look, you don't actually need the status quo where you have this like really big welfare state, and frankly, most of those benefits don't accrue to the poor anyway. So just replace that where like you get a check in the mail if you're like below a certain poverty level. So like those are ways in which I might deviate from other libertarians. But other than that, I mean, I'm pretty much sort of free market, deregulation, privatize, that sort of stuff.
I think I read somewhere that you are an open borders guy.
I am, yes.
Is that because of the free trade nature and sort of the open competition, or is it something else?
Yeah, no, that is basically right. So the sort of quick pitch for open borders, at least to fellow libertarians, is you say, look, like as a libertarian, you endorse private property rights, you endorse occupational choice, freedom of association. So the analogy I always give is to state borders. So if I own a business in West Virginia and somebody from Virginia says, hey, can I come work for you? And I say, yeah, I would like you to come work for me. They can do that and they can cross the borders, and they say, they're allowed to do that because they have the right to choose their occupation. I have the right to do that because if I own my business, I have the property rights that entitle me to do that. And it doesn't really change if you're crossing national borders. So if somebody says, hey, I want to come work for your business, I'm like, yeah, I would love to have you, and they're in Canada or whatever. They still have the right to associate with me. I still have the right to hire them and so on. And so that's like the short version of the libertarian case for open borders, is just other sorts of libertarian rights seem to entitle people to move back and forth across borders. Now, there are like lots of objections, and like happy to talk more about those if you're interested. So then there are these concerns about, so like Milton Friedman, who I was just talking about, he said, well, there is this potential incompatibility between open borders and having a welfare state, because there's this worry that increased immigration might be a strain on the welfare state. Although interestingly, what he said about that was not that we should not have immigration. He just said it should all be done illegally. So he was like, we actually need more illegal immigration, which I thought was interesting. And like people also worried about, well, if we have more immigration, this might change like sort of the political culture of a country, so we get less libertarian policy. That's another concern. But I would say at first blush, libertarians should have a strong presumption in favor of open borders, because you just have the right to hire the people that you want to hire, associate with the people that you want to associate, choose your job, and so on.
Why would Milton Freeman be in favor of illegal immigration?
Well, so his worry was that you would have, so there's this empirical question first, which is like, what's the actual fiscal impact of immigration? And so like the data suggests it's actually not, so there are different estimates, but it's not super big in one direction rather than another. But Friedman's worry was that you would have immigrants come to the United States, become eligible for entitlement programs, and then strain those programs. And then maybe this would mean higher taxes to help fund them. And so he said, look, if you want to come to the country but not become eligible for any welfare benefits, that was fine by him. And so that's why he said, look, I'm fine with more immigration as long as it's done illegally, and so you're not eligible. And there is a position which I'm sort of sympathetic to. So like I do think that this worry about immigrants sort of straining the entitlement system is just sort of empirically off base. But like, let's bracket that empirical question. Then there's this further suggestion that a number of libertarians have made, which is, look, let's just allow people to come to the United States, but like restrict their access to certain benefits for a certain amount of time, if you're really worried about that. And so my view is, if I can't get you on board with this sort of full-on open borders position, maybe I can get people who have this sort of Milton Friedman worry about the welfare state. Maybe I can get them on board by saying, look, let people live here, let people work here, buy property here, etc., and just restrict their eligibility for certain benefits for a particular number of years. That sort of solves the welfare state worry.
And I think we saw the actual opposite of that very recently, where people that were coming in illegally were able to receive benefits that the rest of us were not able to receive because they came in illegally.
So yes, so I think it's fair to say, like, look, if you've paid into the system with your taxes, like you have a stronger claim to those benefits than somebody who hasn't. And so I think you could say, all right, like a fair immigration system, and here again, insofar as we're worried about the welfare eligibility concern, is we could just say, yeah, like you have to sort of come in, pay taxes for a certain number of years, and then you become eligible. So that to me is an improvement over a situation which says you can't come in at all, because in that case, so you could have an immigrant who says, look, life in America without American welfare benefits is still better than life in my home country. I say, yeah, okay, cool. Like if that person makes that judgment, let them come in. And then you don't have to worry about the sort of cost to the welfare state either.
Yeah, it's also immigration seems to be maybe the only way we're going to get out of some of the demographic hurdles that we're not in as bad a position as most of the rest of the world, but we're in we're in a little bit of a predicament, and there are certain cultures that are more sympathetic to our way of view, our perspectives on family, our perspectives on work and culture, that may be more easily acclimated into the American society. And trying to figure out who those people are seems to be who those people would be seems to be something that government should take a closer look at. I don't know what do you think about that, about the demographic element of that?
So there's one dimension of the demographic question which I think is I don't know what is like really important, which is like age. So I'm getting the numbers wrong, but they're like the basic idea is correct, which is like when Social Security was initially created many decades ago, like there were, I don't know, like 25 workers for every retiree. Now I think it's like 3 workers for every retiree. So one big benefit of immigration is you can get younger people in here who are working, who are paying taxes, and help solve that demographic problem. In terms of like culture and politics, I mean, so here again, coming from a libertarian perspective, I would say I don't want the government in a position to impose like political or cultural litmus tests. So, like an analogy would be, I don't know, to like freedom of the press or something like that. You might say, you could at least imagine the government leading or producing more libertarian outcomes if they like made editorial boards or newspapers pass like an ideological litmus test. Like you can't say anything like in favor of communism, or else the government will censor you. Like maybe that would produce slightly more libertarian outcomes over time, but you would say, this is just a restriction of people's freedom. So like you have freedom of the press, you have freedom of speech. If you want to speak against libertarian values, if you want to speak against American values, that's sort of your right. Like that's part of what freedom of speech implies. Similarly, like if I want to associate with people or other people want to associate with people, so you have like, I don't know, the Communist Party of the United States, if that's still a thing, you say, look, their freedom of association entitles them to associate with one another in those meetings, even though I think it's bad for, the American economy or something like that if communism spreads, or even like the buying and selling of property. So like the government can't restrict your right to sell the Communist Manifesto, even though that has like a distinctively anti-American message or anti-capitalist message. And so similarly, I would say we don't want to impose political or cultural litmus tests on immigration for the same sorts of reasons. So it's like to impose those limitations would be to restrict the rights of business owners to hire who they want to hire. It would restrict the property rights of sort of people who own housing to rent housing to the people that they want to rent it to, restrict the freedom of association of Americans who want to associate with immigrants. I think this is just sort of an implication of libertarianism, which is like you kind of can't impose a litmus test on the exercise of people's rights.
So I just returned from London last week, and obviously the whole the UK has just been um, I would say I personally would use the word devastated demographically by who they've let in, and you see that as an outflow in things like these rape gangs, these cultural issues where judges will rule that Sharia law is a legitimate usurpance over traditional parliamentarian types of form of law, and is creating some significant issues in that country, or at least for those 130,000 white girls who've been potentially um, assaulted by these cultural monsters. And so, where do you stand on situations like that where there is a culture? In this case, it's been fairly well documented and very difficult to discount the cultural interference and the direction of those assaults from one culture into the native culture, and also into the again adults of one culture against children of another culture, um, and it seems to be well over 100,000 instances of that. And it seems to be also so much that even 1 in 7 of these non-native culture males have been involved, have taken place in this. So it seems like almost everyone would have to know about it within that sort of that immigrated culture. Where do you stand on situations like that, where you have sort of somewhat hostile cultures, but we didn't realize how hostile they were when we first allowed them in?
So yeah, I mean, one thing I would do is draw a distinction between I'm not sure what sort of changing the culture of a country versus like committing crimes. So certainly you could say like crime avoidance, crime prevention, and prohibition, like that's perfectly fine from like a libertarian perspective. And also too, like crime itself can be a legitimate reason to restrict movement. So if somebody is suspected of a crime or is like highly likely to commit a crime, and that's not exactly about culture. That's just so like forgetting immigration. Just to take like a really simple case, like if you know that somebody has very clear intentions to commit a crime, you can at least temporarily restrict their movement in order to prevent the crime from happening. So that's one thing. But sort of just as a general point about the kind of cultural change, I mean, one consideration is that culture can change not only as a result of external causes, so something like migration, it can also change as a result of internal causes. A thought experiment might be, okay, take whatever ideology or customs like you oppose or think are really harmful, and just imagine. So we were talking earlier about like virality, so like you have like memes and things like that go viral, that like one of these ideologies goes viral, so like communism or something like that goes viral in the United States, and then you have all of these newspapers that are printing pro-communist propaganda. You have all of these meetings of the American Communist Party sprouting up. Can we use the power of the state to stop them, or do we use sort of non-coercive means to try to counterbalance? So things like persuasion, like counter-protesting, and so on. So I think, generally speaking, we try to use non-coercive measures to prevent the sorts of cultural changes that we oppose. And so I would argue for a similar case or a similar approach when it comes to immigration, where you don't use the power of the state to restrict freedom, but you use things like civil society and maybe even the marketplace to make the change or to counteract the change.
Oh, yeah, that's helpful. It seems like if we are relegated towards um, the belief that we can use incentives, we can use our votes as sort of informative towards the governing class of what we would like to see happen within societies, and we have a subset of the society that is being ruled by Sharia law that tells them that you must choose one over the other. You cannot have both the national law or the law of Allah, the law of God, in place. It seems like it's almost an unsolvable hurdle to overcome, that idea that God is telling them to do something that is against every fiber of our beliefs, not only on civil rights and informational rights, but also on the nature of what it means to be a human, personal rights.
Yeah, well, and so certainly like libertarians can oppose like the imposition of like religious laws and blasphemy laws and things like that. So I think part of the question is what can be done preemptively. So you
Yeah.
say like, look, like there is like suppose you say like there's a worry that there will be these sort of dramatically illiberal, and by liberal here I just mean sort of like Bill of Rights kind of liberties type stuff, not like the Democratic Party, just like what we think of as like American liberalism, like a real danger of illiberal norms or illiberal policies. Like, how much can you do to prevent that preemptively based on sort of like speculation or something like that about how things will go down the line? I mean, my inclination is to say like, unless it's sort of imminent or inevitable, you sort of can't impose a litmus test uh, preemptively based on that sort of concern.
What about statistically? Can you be preemptive if you've got a statistical sort of a 1 in 7 statistics, or maybe something like it's 75%? Is that good enough statistically to be preemptive? I don't
Well,
know.
yeah, well, yeah. So I don't have the percentage. Um, I mean, so I would give you an analogy in response. So it's like, at what point would we start imposing a litmus test on newspapers to stop printing
Yeah.
articles, and it's like, it's, yeah. So 1% no, 95% yes, 70%, I'm not sure. But what I would want to say, like the sort of more precise claim I can make is, like, I do think these sorts of freedoms are parallel, like the freedom
Okay.
to move and the freedom to say what you want and congregate with whom you want and so on. And so all I would say is, if we're willing to sort of make a statistical case for immigration restriction, then we just have to be willing to commit to that same thing, or that same sort of standard when it comes to other sorts of liberties. So we say, all right, the government can start restricting association and press and speech and property within the country to prevent that same sort of change. And so here again, like, for me, it's, 1 is too low, 95% is high, or high enough. Where you meet in the middle, I'm not sure. But I would say, look, we got to be able to stick to the same standard across different sorts of freedoms.
So the freedom to immigrate is a freedom of a non-citizen,
Yeah.
right? But the freedom to congregate, the freedom of the free press, that sort of thing is sort of a inherent right of citizens and the aliases of citizens here. So does the libertarian stance say that even non-citizens have those sorts of freedoms that we as citizens should have?
Yeah, for the most part, the answer would be yes. So the idea would be that, so here again, if you see the right to immigrate as a right that flows from these other rights, like private property rights and association, they would say, look, right to private property, free association, congregation, and so on, those are sort of natural or human rights. So those don't depend on sort of which borders you live between. Those are just sort of rights you have as a human being. And so libertarians often draw this distinction between so-called negative rights and positive rights. So
Yeah.
negative rights are basically the right to be left alone. So like, you want to buy and sell property, or sell property to a person from across the street, go for it. I just have to keep my hands off. Or you want to associate with someone on the other side of the street, fine, I just can't interfere. Those are negative rights. Positive rights are these rights, like, to certain things, like maybe you have a right to healthcare, to retirement income, or something like that. Libertarians tend to be fairly skeptical of positive rights, but I think you can make like a case that you could understand how positive rights could be grounded, like in sort of I don't know what the right, like a state-centric framework. So in other words, well, maybe you do have the right to retirement income via Social Security because you've paid into it over the course of your life as a citizen. And so maybe non-citizens aren't entitled to Social Security because they haven't paid in. That seems
Okay.
reasonable. But then you say, freedom to buy and sell property, where all I have to do is keep my hands off you. Those are sort of natural rights that don't depend on states.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. Well, we've got about 3 minutes left. I want to ask you a little bit about your daily schedule. What sort of routine do you have? Like, are you sitting at a computer most of the time? Are you in front of classes most of the time? Tell me about that. And also tell me a little bit about your family.
Well, those two questions connect. So yeah, so I've got a wife and 2 kids. My daughter is 13. My son is 10. And my day starts by waking up at around 6, because my daughter's school gets started pretty early, and I can't always trust her to get up on time. So I get up with her, and then my son usually gets up. And so we make sure that they get off to school. This is like, I feel like it's a cliche for people to talk about this, but it's true. So I'm going to say it anyway. So I try to do CrossFit every single day in the morning. And if I have to work out in the morning, or else I'm not going to do it at all. Like, I just don't have the energy. So like, I'll do that, come home. Yeah. Try to get the writing done. I'm not as good at that as I should be. But I try to still prioritize that. And then, once that's done, the emails start coming in, some like administrative stuff starts popping up. And then, the teaching schedule, it's usually 2 days a week. So it's really nice. I like to teach back to back. So I'll teach one class, get like a 10-minute break, then teach the second class, talk to students during office hours, that sort of thing. And then I try to keep everything sort of after that. So I usually teach like late afternoon, early evening, and then that's like family time, when I'm done with that.
Okay.
And I try not to stay up super late, because otherwise I don't have the energy to get up early with my kids.
I'm right there with you. Yeah, yeah. Now, are you doing most of your teaching virtually, or is it in person?
So most of it is in person. So I do teach one online class. But so the in person, the other classes are in person. And I mean, I did the online thing for a year and a half during COVID. And yeah, I mean, that was tough. There's just sort of a dynamic that you get in person. It's just like the coming up before class or after class, like a lot of learning and a lot of dialogue happens. It's just not this. You can try to recreate it over Zoom, but it's not the same.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, definitely understand that. Definitely understand that. Uh, what what big projects are you working on next? Do you have any books in the process?
Yeah. So one's on libertarianism. It's called
Okay.
Libertarianism, the Basics, and I'm writing that with a friend of mine and one of my favorite philosophers. Her name's Jess Flanagan at the University of Richmond. And then I'm writing a debate book on immigration, of all things, with another friend of mine and another great philosopher. His name's Rishi Joshi at the University of Arizona, and that's going to be kind of cool because it's like back and forth. So like we have our opening statements, we respond, and then we respond to the responses. And so that's going to be sort of a unique writing experience for me. And like, so it's interesting because Professor Joshi and I, like, we're good friends. I think he's like phenomenal. And I like to joke with him that he's got everything right except this. Like, we agree on like 95%, but on immigration, we just don't see eye to eye. And I think that actually is good for the book, because it shows like how people who, even though we're like on the same page on almost everything, like that doesn't mean we're gonna agree on that last 5%.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that. I love that. Where is the best place for folks? I mean, you mentioned Substack and we mentioned the books, and we'll link to them on Amazon below. But is there somewhere that you like to hang out? Are you on Twitter more often than everywhere else?
Yeah, probably. Probably. I'm not sure if this is good for me, but yeah, probably Twitter. So you can see me there. CA Freiman, my last name Freiman, and I do, like, when I post stuff on Substack or I get stuff published, I also post about that on Twitter. So if you follow me there, you'll be up to date on anything I do. You can buy my books when they come out. I'll be sure to promote those.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, great, great. Well, Chris, thanks so much for spending a few minutes with us. Really enjoy the conversation about content, immigration, economics, and also the political system. Everyone will link to everything below, but everyone have a great rest of the day. And Chris, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast.
Great, thanks.
Why did I write this book? A life full of meaning, achievement, and hope often seems unreachable for Western men. But now in these pages, an offer is lurking, waiting, expecting, daring. Daring you to seize it. This is an offer to give up being a victim to forever arise a victor. Visit rickwalker.com.